we don't have time to waste to just sit on the ugly. Um, and I still struggle with that. I think we all do. I tend to be a people pleaser type of person, and I want to do right by people, but um, I think I've been through enough that I just want to live my life the way that I think I should, um, and do the best I can in the process. So I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned, is just to kind of let go of the expectations that I think I perceived were put on me, that I don't know if they actually existed. And I'm getting better at it. I'm not great, but it's a growth process, just like anything else.
Hello, and welcome to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. This podcast is about exploring the grief that occurs at different times in our lives, in which we have had major changes and transitions that literally shake us to the core and make us experience grief. I created this podcast for people to feel a little less hopeless and alone in their own grief process as they hear the stories of others who have had similar journeys. I'm Kendra Rinaldi, your host. Now, let's dive right into today's episode. Welcome to today's episode. Today I will be chatting with Danielle Remigio, and Danielle lives in the Boston area. She is a student affairs professional. She actually had a TEDx talk, and that's actually how I found her, was through this TEDx talk about grief that she did. And the topic of that TEDx talk is called Cleaning Up the Grief Process. So today we'll be chatting about her grief journey, as well as everything that's come from that and all the growth. So welcome, Danielle.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So let's start a little bit with just some chit chat. So tell us a
Sure.
little more about where you live and what you do. So you said student affairs. So let's talk about that. Your work.
Yeah. So I have been a New England person my whole life, pretty much in the Boston area. I grew up about a half hour north of the city. Now I live about a half hour south of the city. I lived in Rhode Island for a little bit. I went to school in Springfield, Mass. So pretty much Mass and Rhode Island have been my place. But when I went to college, I realized I really wanted to work with college age students, and that's what I got my master's in. And I did a lot of work in emergency response, mental health counseling, in a college setting, not in a counseling center, but through my work in housing. And I realized that there's just so many ways that you can impact people, and I've felt really good about it. I joke my parents are kind of an amalgamation of what I became professionally, because my mom primarily was a stay-at-home mom and my dad was in law enforcement as a police officer. You put those together, and I kind of joke that that's residence life at a college. And now I work in student conduct, conflict resolution, managing crisis, following up on issues. So I kind of bring an empathetic edge to the processes with all that stuff. And I've been doing it for about 13 years. So
Oh,
it's been a
you
great
look so young.
time.
You look like a college student yourself. Like
Oh,
I
thank
wouldn't
you.
imagine you
I am
having
not.
been working for 13 years.
No. I finished my undergrad degree just over 10 years ago at this point, but I did my master's 8 years ago. Yeah, but
That's
thank you. That
wonderful.
makes me feel good.
Yes, you do. You're so young. So you were mentioning then all the things that your parents did. Do you have siblings?
Yeah.
Did you grow up with siblings and a big family, small
So
family, a lot of family around you? Tell us a little bit about that upbringing.
yeah, I have a massive family, but in the household, it was my parents and my sister and I. So I have one younger sister. She's 4 years younger. She's great. She works with kids. So I work with the college age, and she works with babies, and absolutely loves it. So that's really great. But we're one. we're two of 12 grandkids on my dad's side of the family, and he has a significantly large extended family. Some are in this area, but most are actually in Canada, because that's where he grew up when he was a child. And then my mom's side is just as big. It's very large. Not as many first cousins for me on that side, but it's a very large extended family. I always have a cousin doing something, and my friends get confused, like, which cousin is this? Because there's just a lot of us. But it's really great when there's 17 people my age and younger when I'm at Christmas, and it's a great feeling. We're all really close. We have, you know, text message group chains. We have
Threads.
a
Uh-huh.
fantasy football league. Like all these different things to try to connect us. But definitely a really great close knit family.
So they're like your family, they could be your friends and your family, all your cousins.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like no need for friends when you have 17 cousins all your age or so.
I know, yeah.
That's awesome. Now, regarding the career that you do in this last few years with the pandemic and so forth, did you still work in the same capacity? Because I know a lot of kids ended up doing some of these semesters at home. So,
Yeah.
how did your role change in what you did in the last couple of years?
Yeah, so it definitely shifted where the staff that I oversaw did a lot of work to help the students that were still on campus. So the school that I worked at still had some people that were on. So there was still a lot of emergencies, a lot of mental health, and I feel like relevant to this, people were grieving their past life of what it was like before the pandemic, or they were grieving that they didn't have a senior year of high school that was normal, or a first year of
Mhm.
college that they considered normal. So there was a lot more issues that we were trying to help with in that regard. It was nice in a way. I got to work from home a couple days a week, which I had never been able to do, really. But otherwise, it was pretty similar. Still handling emergencies and dealing with students that were having a hard time adjusting. Completely understandably, it's a hard time for the world, to
Mhm.
have to try to manage what a new normal looks like and letting go of what was, because I don't think it'll
Mhm.
ever be exactly the same.
Yeah, you touched on something that I always talk about in this podcast, even in my intro, that it's about changes and transitions in life. Grief is about
Hmm.
changes and transitions in
Yep.
life. And some of these may be those sad, hard transitions, but even happy
Mhm.
transitions can also lead to a lot of grief
Yeah.
as well. Even a children, even like a parent, for example, having their child start college, the parent is going to experience some grief. The
Yeah.
child will experience some grief as well. They're
Hmm.
leaving the home, things are not the same. They don't have, that little close-knit support system. There's a lot. So for you to be working in that environment and overall, like you and with the students, you probably are there to support them and be kind of that mama bear, I guess, to some extent for them
Hmm.
as well, right?
Yeah, especially I used to live on campus. In my role, I would manage buildings, and I definitely had some students that called me mom, and had that. So definitely something I can relate to is just being that empathetic figure that they could just walk into my office and sit down and cry or share whatever was happening to them. So it was
Mhm.
definitely, we tried to make it home away from home as much as we can.
Yes. Now, we'll be going into your grief journey in a bit, but just
Yeah.
curious, has that empathy changed for you? Has it expanded within you based on the grief experience you've had in your life and the losses?
I would say so. I think there was ebbs and flows, especially with how I personally reacted to each death that I
Mhm.
experienced. But I would say overall, especially a few years out from my dad's death, who is the biggest
Recent.
impact, that was, yeah, most recent. Um, I would definitely say I am more empathetic. And I think that just comes from life experience. You see things in a different perspective when you've gone through it yourself. And I definitely approach how I respond to someone in grief differently. I'm a little bit more patient. I'm a little bit more understanding. I give a little bit more space and time to address things than I may have before. I think I was standard Boston, move quickly, get things done, just push through it type of person. And I think through some of my losses, I realized that's not how I want to live. And I think people who are going through major changes can't sustain that type of pace, and it's not healthy. So I've definitely learned a lot over the past few years, and I think it's helped me to put some things in perspective.
Doesn't it all? Like it's
Yeah.
like you go through something hard to then be able to understand either more about yourself or even just more about others. And yeah, it shifts things for sure.
Hmm.
So let's talk now about then your mom's passing, which is
Yeah.
the first one that you
Hmm.
experienced. I'm sure probably other things, but these were you have three major ones.
Yeah.
So take us into that experience as to what your mom passed away from, and a little
Sure.
bit of your grieving tools then.
Yeah, so I would say, so this was March 2016. I remember my dad calling me saying, "Hey, you should probably call your mom. She hasn't been feeling well the past couple days." And I'm like, "Okay." So I'd called her on a Monday, and she had said that she had had fluctuating fevers, wasn't really feeling well, couldn't really breathe well. Um, and in the past, she was a smoker, and had had bouts of bronchitis. So that type of sickness wasn't something that was uncommon to her health history. But she's like, "Yeah, I take Advil, and then as soon as it wears off, the fever spikes." And she kept saying that there was like a cyclical pattern. I'm like, "That means it's not working, and something else is wrong. Something's wrong. Something's wrong." I'm like, "You should probably go to the doctors." So she said that she was going to go the next day. And then I was at work, and I got a phone call the next morning from my dad saying that the night before, my mom had actually collapsed, and needed to get taken to the hospital. So I immediately took a train and got to the hospital, and we found out that she had to be put into an induced coma because she had the flu that had transitioned into pneumonia, and her lungs weren't able to heal because they were under too much stress. They were hoping that the coma would help her body rest and heal.
Mm,
Um, we almost got out of the woods by Friday. They were going to take her out of it, and they said things were responding, and then it kind of started to go downhill again. So by that late Sunday night, my dad, my sister, and I were in the hospital probably, oh my gosh, probably around midnight, maybe, having to make the choice to take my mom off life support at that point because it wasn't gonna get any better. So I remember sitting in a room with the doctor with just my dad because he didn't want my sister in the room. Um, and we had to make that choice. So that was really difficult because we hadn't really had a big family loss like that in a really long time. And obviously, it was my mom, and I
and
didn't
just
know which way was up.
one
Yeah.
week that it all
Hmm.
changed like that. So
Yep. It was like one day I was talking to her, and the next I was at the hospital, and she was going into a coma, and I never talked to her again. Um, so it was really difficult. A lot of eyes were on me. My dad was really struggling with how to move forward. They were high school sweethearts. Uh, he didn't know how to use a debit card or how to do certain things because my mom managed everything.
it's so
It's
interesting. More
yeah,
makes you so okay. Actually, now that you're saying this, because we're talking about your background being
yeah,
Portuguese background, that is common in the Portuguese background.
yeah.
Is it right? The matriarch a little bit more of that. Is that right?
Definitely traditional roles,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
My
Okay.
dad was the breadwinner, for the most part, and, he just trusted my mom wholeheartedly to manage
Yes.
everything in our household, and she did it well. He just had no idea how she did it, and so I had to help, manage, like, what bank accounts and how things went into them and how
Oh.
to move forward, so I was definitely a big part of that. Um, but, yeah, I had to help plan the funeral and figure out. I gave the eulogy for my mom, which was difficult, but I knew it was going to end up being me. Um, my dad had a
Mm,
lot of trust in me as a writer and a speaker, so he put me up for that. And I think it was just a lot of stress and pressure to try to handle all at once. So
it's so much, right? Because and especially during these really hard times, all these different little roles that we kind of take,
Mhm.
like, like responsibilities that maybe had there been another person in the family that had a little bit of
Mm.
different skill, then that role would have gone to them. But the fact
Maybe.
that because of your personality and so forth, that these kind of responsibilities went to you. Um, do you remember when you gave the eulogy? Do you remember how it felt in terms of were you, how do I like when you think of that day? I mean, I'm saying this in firsthand experience of the. So, do you remember yourself in the moment, or do you see yourself kind of like an outsider when you remember that day of you even
Oh,
speaking? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
it does. For hers, I remember it in the moment.
Yeah.
When I gave my dad's, I definitely see that, 1,000 foot
Third
view.
person view.
It's,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say there was a difference, but I can remember really wanting to do her justice because she was definitely the quiet, unsung hero. My dad was a very large personality, and she just kind of sat back, and I feel like sometimes she felt forgotten, even though
Mm.
without her, just the fabric of our family would have unraveled because she did everything. So I tried really hard to bridge bringing her to life and
Mm.
also honoring who she was and trying to find how to balance those things. So I think there is such an intentionality behind hers, especially since it was my first time giving a eulogy for someone that impactful, that I can remember that very clearly, like
Mm.
shaking at the altar and being in church. And yeah, that was difficult. Hmm.
Mm. That was just how many days after her passing that you had the I don't
uh
know if culturally why
it
culture wise or what
was
the process
Yeah, so
is of when you have a.
we're Catholic,
Mhm.
Portuguese Catholic, and so she died the Sunday going into Monday, and we had her wake on the Thursday, funeral that Friday. So it was five
It's
days
just the
later.
5 days of
Yeah.
you having
Yep.
to gather
Hmm.
up whatever little
Yeah.
courage and
Yep.
and speak. Yeah, it's so much, but it's also so moving when you are experiencing as an audience, as family, being, hearing that firsthand from someone that knows the disease so well. It's
Mhm.
like it's so much more heartfelt, I
Right.
think, when it is a family member that speaks for the rest of the people and
Sure.
in their own grief journey. So
Hmm.
um, that was beautiful that you did do that as hard as it
Yeah.
was.
Hmm.
So from there on, then this happened 2016. Your mom and my mom
Yeah.
died the same year.
Oh
My mom
wow.
also died 2016. What was then your process after that? Because I'm sure if you said your dad didn't know a lot of these things, the business of
Yeah.
the house management and stuff, um, take us into how was it then aiding your dad in that process of kind of the home and at the same time navigating your grief and aiding him and your sister in their grief
Hmm.
journey?
It I would say I did the best I could for them, and it was a very dark time for me.
Mm.
I feel like I put everyone and everything ahead of my own well-being at that point. Um, I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't eating well. I'm not a big like alcohol drinker, but I was definitely drinking more, and I lived alone, so I was drinking more alone. That and people were starting to notice, like friends, because I would send pictures or whatever, and it didn't impact my work at all. At least that piece of it. Um, I was definitely struggling at work. I wasn't as patient. I wasn't as present as I probably could have been. But I put a lot of my effort into, what happens now? What happens now? What do I do? Um, I definitely had a lot of anger towards people who would complain about their parents or their moms, because I just didn't understand. I'm like, do you not see what I just went through? And I didn't have a lot of patience for it. Um, my sister struggled, and she kind of shut a lot of us out, and it was just very difficult. But I just tried to keep that door open, and as time went on, it got a little bit better. And a couple months later, my dad suggested that I start going to therapy, and I resisted for a little bit, and which is interesting because I've always been a very large advocate for it. I think I was just stubborn in that point. So that June, I decided to set up an appointment with actually the woman who was my mother's therapist to try to help with that transition, just to talk to someone who knew her but also didn't necessarily know me, which ended up being helpful. And I've been with her for like since then, and she's been a great support system. So um, that actually changed a lot in terms of helping me learn the language to talk about things and talk about grief. And funny enough, the first time I saw her was the same day that I found out that my grandfather died, 3 months after my mom. So it just worked out that the appointment was the same day. Um,
Mm.
yeah, so funny how that schedule worked out, but it was actually the same day. Yeah,
Well, so your grandfather, and then tell me the grandfather name in Portuguese.
Vavu. Yeah,
Vavu, Vavu. Your Vavu then, was he your mom's dad or your dad's
my
dad?
dad's dad.
Your
My dad's
dad's
dad.
dad. So
Hmm.
for your dad, then 3 months after, then it's also then experiencing then the loss of his father.
Yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
So take us into then
Yeah.
what other things transpired from there? Because
Yeah.
that's a
So
lot in such a short period of time.
it was, and I remember going to see him in the hospital before he died. He was older, so it was definitely a different process because we recognized he had 4 kids, 12 grandkids. Lived a really great life, that he could really be proud of. He definitely was the patriarch of our family,
Mhm.
moving everyone from the Azores and Portugal to Canada, and then bringing some down to the United States. He was fluent in 3 languages, as a lot of my family is. I wish I was, but a lot of my family is. And he was just like the beacon. Plus, my dad and my grandfather were like jokingly the only 2 tall Portuguese people you've ever seen. They were both like 6'3" type of people. So they were very recognizable and wonderful. Um, I was then told that my dad offered up my services to give the eulogy for him as well, and I,
I was told that
yeah,
my services, my
my services were called upon once again, and I got a little mad. Like, do you realize I just did this for mom 3 months ago? And he's like, but you're so good, you can do it. Like, he wasn't thinking, but I'm actually happy that I did, because it was that one I felt at the point had a lot of pressure, because how do you encapsulate someone who's lived on 2 continents and 3 countries, and been this like beacon for everyone in the family for so
Mm.
long, and how I in my head I was just his oldest grandchild, but I ended up having to give that twice because he was in Canada when he passed. So we did the services up there where I gave the eulogy, and then it was actually translated by a cousin into Portuguese for the rest of my family. And then the next week or so, we did it in the States, down here for immediate family here. So um, I had to do that. It was a lot. And I was very nervous, and I think that came out as anger, because I was just very overwhelmed with having to go through the planning process again. And but I remember having a lot of support from some of my cousins that are around my age, and um, talking to them, sharing drafts, and how do I do this, and being able to reminisce. So it brought a lot of the cousins, like my generation of cousins, closer, after that happened.
Well, talk about having experience then talking on stage that would prepare you then for later on when you did your TED talk,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Being under pressure and all that. What a great
Definitely.
preparation.
Yeah.
So, okay, and then share with us then the what now because you've already shared that your dad then passed away. So,
Mhm.
what were the circumstances around your dad's passing?
Yeah, so that was October of 2017. So it was only about 18 months in between both my parents. I was just about to turn 29 at that point. So I was 28 and had no parents at that point. So it was really wild. I was actually at a wedding down in North Carolina, and um, the morning after the wedding, I got a phone call from my dad's police station where he worked, and I was very confused why they were calling me, and they told me I needed to get home very quickly because my dad had been in an accident. He was an avid motorcycle rider. He was state trained through the police department and was very safe. And he was driving home on a Sunday morning, and someone was driving on the northbound side of the highway and decided to cross over the state trooper overpass, like the crossover on the highway, and caused a collision there. So um, my dad was brought to a hospital in New Hampshire. I flew home and was picked up by police and was escorted to the hospital. And he ended up passing the next day due to his injuries. So it was just one. He was supposed to pick me up from the airport that night to come back from the wedding. He had dropped me off a couple days before. Um, and I remember that being a really great car ride because it was like 5 in the morning, and I kept thanking him over and over for driving me. And we just like grabbed a
So
coffee and
whose
shared
wedding?
stories.
Whose wedding had you gone to?
Yeah, it was a friend of mine from grad school.
Okay.
So I had flown down there to visit, and I was in the ceremony. It was actually really beautiful.
Mm.
Um, and she had met my dad a few times, and I remember just walking up to her, I'm like, my dad was in an accident, I have to go. And actually at the wake, she was supposed to be on our honeymoon, and she flew up to be at the services. And um, years later, that still means a whole lot to
So
me.
much. Yeah.
Yeah. I have some great friends, but yeah, it was similar but different to my mother. It was just very sudden and very unexpected and very fast.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
That is a lot. Plus, then also then there's these other added then emotions
Yeah.
because somebody else is responsible for your father's passing.
Yes.
Different. That's a
Hmm.
big, huge difference from your mom's passing and
Yes.
your grandfather's passing.
Hmm.
So take us into how was that emotionally and what how, grieving
Hmm.
grieving the passing of your dad but with this other layer on top of it.
It was very different, and I felt like I was. You really can't be emotionally prepared to go through a loss that fast, but it was almost like there was an acceptance a little bit quicker because I'm like, I'm alone now. And like that's kind of how I felt. And everyone at that point, because now both my parents were gone, turned to look at me and said, how are we going to get through this? Um, and I obviously I had to plan the funeral, and I sat at the same seat at the funeral home that I did for my mom, and plan. I felt like I was on a first name basis with the people at the funeral home. And I I think one of the most frustrating parts of it was we were still at the hospital, and news and radio were contacting the hospital trying to get in touch with me. There was news trucks outside the hotel I was staying at trying to get information. I was being followed. So I had to have a detective assigned to my sister and I to be safe.
Mm.
I wasn't allowed to say certain things during the eulogy that I gave because I wanted to make sure that when it was broadcast on the news that whoever was following us didn't then try to follow whoever I talked about. So I was very particular. So I felt like I went into emergency management mode like I did at work. And I'm like, all right, let's do this. And just kind of went into logistical planning of how we were going to do the services and was talking to people at the police department that were going to help and trying to manage, okay, now what happens? He had just changed his life insurance policies. Now I have to talk to the insurance policies because it happened too soon before he died. And he didn't have a will because he hadn't got it set up after my mom died. So I had to file things in probate court. So there was so many logistical things that I had to deal with while I wasn't living in his home. I was living on my own. My sister was. So I had to make sure we kept the house, that she was okay, that the house was in my name at that point, that all the insurance stuff was all set, stuff with city employees was all set. So I didn't get to grieve for a while, I felt like.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was still in therapy, thank goodness. Um, I decided that not talking about how it was impacting me was not going to work this time around. I needed to be more open and I needed to just deal with that vulnerability. And in some ways that backfired with how people reacted. But for the most part, I think people recognized that I was just trying to be honest about where I was at. I
Can you
think it
give some
helped.
examples of that? Can you give us
Yeah.
examples of how that vulnerability backfired? Like, what is it that you were saying that people would
Um,
just
I,
curious? Because I'm like, I'm
yeah.
listening. I'm like, wait, why would it backfire for you to be genuine with your emotions and with
Sure.
everything?
There's, I won't say who it was, but
It's okay.
there was one scenario where I was just sharing how I was feeling, and the person was like, "I just don't get it. Like, I don't understand why it's a big deal based on their family dynamics." I'm like, "Well, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm not going to share how I'm feeling with you because it's just not. I understand not having the perspective because years prior I didn't, but I think everyone has." Some experience with major change or loss, whether it's moving, like just like you said when we first started talking, changing or growing or having situations develop or end or start, we all are grieving something. And I was just amazed at people's lack of ability to even feign
Empathize back
empathy.
again too. Yeah, even back to
Yeah.
the empathy component.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So
Hmm.
that was difficult. That was the major example, I guess. Yeah.
But thank goodness that you did have the therapist and that you were able to
Yes.
there be able to be naked per se with your emotions
Sure.
and
Hmm.
just be able to just have them all out. So it sounds like a lot of those months and you said you were close to being 29. So when was your birthday?
Hmm.
So your dad passed away October. When's your birthday?
He passed October 9th. My birthday is the 29th of October.
Oh, so that's same.
Hmm.
How was that then for you? I can't even imagine. Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
I'm like I go into that my own kind of feeling kind of mode. But
Mm.
how was it then on that 29th
Yeah.
without him there and still in the bit? You were still doing so much of the business of grieving. I don't even
Hmm.
know if you had even gotten to your grieving by that point. So
No. Funny enough, my sister and my dad had gotten me tickets. I don't know if you're a musical fan,
I studied
but
theater. Yeah. So
oh, wonderful. So I had gotten tickets from the two of them to see the original Broadway cast of Dear Evan Hansen on my 29th birthday. That was absolutely incredible, and it was.
are you like can't wait till you get to see it in the movie theater now too? Are
I'll
you
definitely
looking
go.
forward to it? Yeah.
I'll definitely go. Yeah, I absolutely loved it, and I think it was one of the first times that I really cried. Like, obviously, I did
Mm.
during the services, but that show is just a gut punch of emotions in so many ways, and it just kind of came out. And my sister also did, I think, to a point, if I remember correctly. She was struggling to let things out a little bit. And then we had dinner with a family member and got to talk about the show, but also my dad. And I think it was the best way, like knowing that he gave me that experience even before he died, and he didn't know what the show was. He had no idea. He liked musicals, but that wasn't. He was more old school. Les Mis and Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat and Phantom of the Opera type of guy. Um, it was it was a beautiful day. It was pouring rain, but it was a beautiful day, and I
Wow.
appreciate
So
it so
like
much.
I'm looking, I create images as you're talking. I create
Yeah.
movies as you're talking. I'm seeing the pouring rain, pouring tears, all this cleansing, going on with the emotions just coming out that could be
Hmm.
because of the show, but at the same time using it as a catalyst to just let
Absolutely.
all your emotions of everything that had happened in the last, year and a half to just pour out
Hmm.
as well. So it's like, yeah, how when the mood outside reflects the
It
emotion, it's
matched.
like,
Yeah. It was
oh
awesome.
wow. So that's so good that it was good. Now, how then from there, this is 2017,
Yeah.
did you go from there to then having a TED Talk and to even thinking about putting together a TED Talk?
It was a dream. It was fantastic. I was given the opportunity to apply. So it was just an application that I put in. It was a new TED affiliated campus. So a lot of the TEDx organizations are through colleges and universities around the country, and you have to be affiliated in a certain way. And the students took care of all that stuff. Uh, and they put out a call for applications to be a speaker, and like I can't not. And I had been going back and forth. I'm like, God, do I talk about something that I do at work or conflict resolution or training or something? And I'm like, I think it's time to tell my story. I had
Mm.
already wanted to write a book about it. I'd wanted to write things out. It's how I feel best about things, is when I put things on paper. Like, I can do this. So I applied, oh gosh, July of last summer. So while in the midst of the
Of
pandemic,
20
I was actually
July
furloughed.
2020. Uh-huh.
Yep. So I was
I'm
furloughed from
saying
my
the
job at
date in
that
case whenever
point.
whenever somebody
Yep.
listens to this, because this part, you never know the timing. So okay, July
Absolutely.
2020.
July 2020, I was furloughed from my job for a month, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to apply to this. I ended up getting an interview round where I had to give a 10-minute spiel of what my talk would be. And then they chose speakers. And then in January, we were chosen. So there was 6 of us that ended up going through about 6 weeks of classes through TED. Like, they have formalized classes that we did together virtually. And then we spent about 5 Saturdays out at my undergrad campus in Springfield, Mass, rehearsing. And we had the lessons from the classes on how to formulate your talk, how to create a message, how to put things into story format in a really concrete way, and practice timing. And I've never listened to myself on recording more times after recording my talk and then listening to it back to learn about my cadence and pacing and make sure I was under time. So um, March of 2021, we got to do a live event. And then oh my gosh, probably about 2 months ago now, uh, I was able to see it posted on YouTube, and now it's out there for the world. And it was such a positive experience, not only from a grief catharsis place, but also, we were still in the pandemic and barely doing anything, and we were all starting to get vaccinated, but not all of us yet, based on, that was when there was schedules of who could get them when. And I'm like, this is my one thing. Like, I can leave the house and like go to rehearsal and go visit a campus I love. And it was such a positive experience from start to finish. I am so grateful that I had it, and it's opened up opportunities like these. So I couldn't be happier with it.
That is so amazing. You're sharing about this because that's one of the things I want to do. I want to do
Yeah,
a TED Talk. I think I told you that in the little. I
you
think I
did.
might have
Yep.
shared that. Yeah,
You
I'm
should.
like, I want to know how to do that
Yep.
because I actually did, like a little vision everything. I actually wrote myself all the details, how it feels to hop on stage, how everything, what I'm
Mm,
wearing. Um, and so to hear that they go through, I did had no clue that you go through all this training process and classes
mhm.
and so forth. That is so incredible, because not only are you having the opportunity to share your story, but you're also learning all these skills. So I had
Yes.
no clue that they do all that.
It was so helpful because the idea that I had and what I spoke on were similar in topic, but not in execution. The whole concept of clean was something that I developed actually through the class portion, realizing that I wanted something for people to have a very easy take home message. Some of that you could latch onto, that you could remember, that's visual. And I learned that from some of the skill building that we did during the courses. Otherwise, it was a little bit more about me and my story, which in some ways is impactful. But I think when you're putting it into tangible things that everyone can visualize, I think it was it gave me the opportunity to broaden the scope of who could be impacted by it. So much appreciated.
That is wonderful. And then with the people then that you did, these six people, the six of you,
Yeah.
did this create a bond? You guys going through this process of learning and training and rehearsing? Are you
Hmm.
close to the people that you went through this process with?
Yeah. Yeah. So they actually all know that I'm recording this today,
Oh,
and
I love it.
they were so excited, and it is such a great group of people. I'd say there's like four of us that talk pretty consistently, and I we've been each other's champions. One put out a self-published poetry book. One is was in the Paralympic trials. We've all had our own new life experiences since then, and we've been each other's champions for them. And we're
Mhm.
trying to get together again. We want to help out with future events. So they've definitely been an awesome support system, and they were the whole time during rehearsals. It was such a good group.
So great. Like people you would have not met had you not
No.
gone through what you went through
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
like it's like people come into your life, as people exit our lives, right? In ways, but then there's also
Mhm.
people that come into our lives. And so this is great that you have this little cheerleading squad here cheering
Yeah, they're
for
wonderful.
you. That is so amazing.
Mhm.
Now, how does your grief look like now? What does your grief look like now in
Mhm.
2021?
Uh, it ebbs and flows. I think one of the biggest things is I have a partner that I live with, and he also has had death and loss in his life. And I think one of the best things that I have taken from us being able to talk about those experiences is, one, he gets it, but two, we're both just so open about, I'm having a bad mom day, or I'm having a bad dad day, or I saw this perceived message. My dad's police badge number was 193. I actually have it tattooed on my arm. And I'll see 193 in like license plates or numbers at work, and we'll point those things out and try to take anniversaries of passings or birthdays really seriously and do things to honor them. So I try to look at it from that perspective more than anything else. But if I'm sad, I'm sad. In a couple weeks, it's the anniversary of my dad's accident, and um, I'm very aware of that. And I feel like my body can feel it when it gets closer.
Mhm.
And I get very tired, and have to pay attention to myself a little bit more. But I would say at this point, it's about honoring them and trying to move forward in a way that I think would make them proud. My sister and I started a scholarship fund for the high school that my parents went to try to give back to students that want to go into public service fields. So that has been really great to know that we're giving back to communities in honor of them. So it's still hard. I think of down the road, if I get married or have kids, like they're not going to have grandparents. And that's something that I struggle with a lot, um, is grieving the missed out future that I'm gonna have.
Mm.
But um, yeah,
And it's so interesting because you're grieving even now, just the idea of
yeah,
that forward thinking,
hmm,
right? It is so interesting how we do this with ourselves. Like we
yeah,
like start grieving even before it even has happened. But we know that these moments will or may come that we're going to miss them again, grieve them again.
hmm,
I tell that, when people talk about it being like this, a time as if it gets easier with time, I'm like, well, I don't think that's necessarily the case because there are like really crucial moments in our life in which it just can
hmm,
come pouring in again, right? Like
right,
somebody walking down the aisle you know, and nobody on their,
yeah,
holding their arm, those kind of things. And I didn't mean to
hmm.
like put forward something here. I didn't,
No,
that
no,
wasn't my intention, by the way. Sorry, I noticed that was like even insensitive as I was saying it. But you know what I mean? It was just these things that come up that we may experience, like you said, if you when you have
hmm,
children, or if you have children, like um not having your parents there to support you in that process either. And not only
yeah,
what the children are not having, but what you're not getting in that moment.
right,
So those yeah, those will be major milestones as well
hmm,
in your grief journey. So I can understand.
yeah. Uh, I'm gonna be 33 next month, and uh, I often think about, like, would they have been okay with the decisions I'm making? And obviously, it's hard to know because I feel like I've changed as a person. But I think one thing that I've tried is just to be as absolutely honest about where I'm at as I can, whether it's good, bad, ugly. Um, Being really honest about how people's words impact me, whether it's a family member or a friend. Um, we don't have time to waste to just sit on the ugly. Um, and I still struggle with that. I think we all do. I tend to be a people pleaser type of person, and I want to do right by people, but um, I think I've been through enough that I just want to live my life the way that I think I should, um, and do the best I can in the process. So I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned, is just to kind of let go of the expectations that I think I perceived were put on me, that I
Mm.
don't know if they actually existed. And I'm getting better at it. I'm not great, but it's a growth process, just like anything else.
I love the word perceived, and I don't know. I'm curious how you're using it. It's so interesting because you're not making it be the fact; it's just how you took it. And
Yeah.
I want to honor that because that is just such a huge growth component in us when we
Hmm.
switch to that. It's like, oh, this is how I
Hmm.
perceived this situation, or this is how I perceived what this person said, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that, that, and in that moment it's true to you. It doesn't mean that that's what the person intended. Is that phrase or way of being and thinking of perceiving something you've always had, or is it something you've gained from either your own experiences or from going to the therapist? Just I'm really curious because
Yeah.
it's such a maturity in that. I want to just honor you for that. It's so mature.
Oh, thank you. I would say it's a little bit of both. One, from an external place, I think it was my professional training. I manage, roommate conflicts and conflicts between people, and major issues. So I think the intent versus impact of what people do and say is something that I will look for in how to manage issues that I see between people. Internally, I think that was a lot of therapy and experience to get me to the point where I needed to take a step back and recognize that the expectations that I'm putting on myself to succeed or be perfect or be that type A oldest child that does everything perfectly isn't real. Um, and I'm just doing the best I can. And I hope that my support system will continue to support me, even if it doesn't look as perfect as it may have in the past. And I think I was just tired of putting up a front that I was okay. A lot of people would ask me after my mom passed away how my sister was doing or how my dad was doing. And it never really followed up with how I was doing, because they're like, you seem like you're doing great. I seem like I'm doing great. I wasn't, but I put up a good front. And I think after my dad died, that was just not a thing. I was not going to do that again. I wasn't going to put myself through that again. If I was having a rough day, I was just going to tell people I was having a rough day, and that was that. Um, and I think more people accepted that than I expected. So seeing that response that I wasn't expecting opened the door for me to just be myself and show a little bit more flaws, and know that people are going to still walk through the door. So I learned a lot that way. Yeah.
It's so liberating, right? It's so
It's fantastic.
liberating. Yeah, it's so
Yep.
there's so much freedom in that vulnerability. There is just so much freedom. And just the people that show up in your life and support you when you are vulnerable,
Hmm.
because they're really seeing you is just incredible. And the people that probably start like not being around or probably just
Right.
the ones that didn't need to be there either because they're uncomfortable with that. But
Hmm.
that is so amazing. Now, tell us about your memoir that's in the book, in the works,
Yeah.
and how is that process going?
Oh my gosh. Earlier stages, but I have little vignettes that I have put together, but it has always been, always since kindergarten, first grade. I've always wanted to be a writer. Um, I'm a little bit of an academic nerd where I went to my first college fair in seventh grade. The college recruiters were very confused why a seventh grader was there. Uh,
I even
yeah,
just had to kind of like, I
it's
only
not.
got it if we say, what college recruit, what?
Uh-huh. Yep, I was 13. But I wanted to learn about creative writing programs. I was dead set on it. Obviously, I think I wanted to eventually, when I was applying to schools, I got a psychology degree and I wanted to work, and I knew at that point, just in very large quotes, being a writer was not something I could commit to at 18. But I have wanted to write a book. I've toyed around with some ideas. And after these experiences, it was just so unique. And I don't like saying tragic because that makes it seem so large. And I don't know. I don't like that word, but it's visually intriguing. The way that I had to deal with things is unique, at least to me. And I wanted to share like the one skill that I know that I have and try to help people with it. So the plan is, and what I'm doing is balancing my own stories of walking linearly through the three deaths that we just talked about, as the portion of my life that I really want to focus on, and then have it flash back to different points in my childhood that kind of influenced my reactions in the present in that point. Um, so for example, I had written a portion of my dad driving me to the airport, and which is the last time I saw him. And flashing back in my head, one of the memories I have is he used to be in a softball league with a bunch of other police departments, and I used to go with him. And we'd sneak out of the house early on Sunday morning so my sister wouldn't wake up, and we would leave her and my mom at home, and walking down the same set of stairs, and one of them was creaky. So walking down those stairs, when he drove me to the airport, and then kind of thinking of all the times we've gone places together, and trying to share those types of stories. So
Mm.
that's the intent. I'm hoping to have it finished in the next year or so, to have it be published. But um, yeah, that's the plan. That's the big goal. But
Yeah.
I'm at a point where it needs to happen. I feel like it's inside, just waiting to come out. I'm finally at a point where I can trust myself as a writer to tell that story accurately.
Wonderful. That's so good.
Yeah.
When you're talking about the creaking step, I see it visually again there, but I see it like it's easy in a movie, right? To do those
Right.
things. But then how do you do it like in a writing thing of like
Uh-huh.
overlapping this little smaller little foot, standing on a
Yeah.
step compared to now, as
Mhm.
your adult foot next to your dad's as you're coming down the stairs for him to take you to the airport. But like that
Mhm.
visually there, I could see it in the little like you know, s
We're gonna
pan
get there.
down to the chair. We'll get there. That's awesome. I can't wait to hear when you message me that you have it out, then we'll
Oh,
make
I
sure
definitely
to
will.
schedule you for an interview then. Now, in the meantime, how can people find you? Do you want to say
Yep.
like again repeat the name of the TED Talk, and
Sure.
any other ways in which people can get in contact with you?
Yeah, you got it. So, uh, the TED Talk is called "Cleaning Up the Grief Process," and that's just on YouTube. So if you either Google my name or that title, it'll pop right up. Uh,
I'll link it then to the bottom in the show notes. I'll do that.
Perfect.
Okay.
It's through TEDx Western New England University is the school that put it on, but it's "Cleaning Up the Grief Process" on YouTube. And then I'm also putting together. I just launched a website, so just DanielleRemigio.com. Which will be a combination of a blog writing. The talk will be on there as well as any presentations and trainings that I'm willing to put on. I'm definitely a trainer. I train a lot for my job and have some ones built about grief and relationship building and conflict resolution that people can book me for if they wish. And then Instagram, I have it connected as DL underscore Remigio on Instagram. Those will be the main places to find me.
Wonderful. And thank you so much. It's been so lovely to be chatting with you and seeing this big, huge smile on
Oh,
my
thank you.
screen radiating. It's just so refreshing. And
It's
with
easy. It was a
all
nice
your story,
conversation.
I'm glad you felt that. It's so interesting because yeah, people are like, "Oh, this was fun," and it's like people would probably never think of that when they're tuning in to
Hmm.
listen to a podcast about grief, that actually having the opportunity to talk about it can be fun.
Absolutely. Well, especially the gratitude that's in the name of your podcast. I think people can feel more gratitude when they realize what's at stake. You
Mhm.
can really feel connected to that. So I think I'm definitely grateful for the experience and the conversation and the experiences that have opened doors through everything, making the best
The
of what we got,
growth.
right?
Yes, the
Hmm.
growth that has come, and now all your ways of paying it forward, because things that you mentioned, even just of when you chose what to study and how you kind of married the two elements of your mom and your dad, but
Hmm.
this this way of serving others, right? Service is kind of
Hmm.
like your one of your
I'm
core
trying.
at your core. Yeah. So, and how you do with the school in the school setting, but now also how you serve others by sharing your story as well. So
Hmm.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you again so much for choosing to listen today. I hope that you can take away a few nuggets from today's episode that can bring you comfort in your times of grief. If so, it would mean so much to me if you would rate and comment on this episode. And if you feel inspired in some way to share it with someone who may need to hear this, please do so. Also, if you or someone you know has a story of grief and gratitude that should be shared so that others can be inspired as well, please reach out to me. And thanks once again for tuning in to Grief, Gratitude, and the Gray in Between podcast. Have a beautiful day.